Chapter 856. Two human sword cultivators stood on the peak of the sect in the hinterland of the barbarian land. In less than half an hour, the White Flower City, which was full of skeletons, became a page of the almanac. As time went by, it would become an old almanac that no one cared about. Under Qi Tingji's order, for immortals in golden armor, who were thousands of feet tall, stood on the four sides of the border of the White Flower City. They formed a formation like a net to prevent the big fish from escaping. In addition, there were all kinds of strange phenomena. Thunder rose in the white clouds, and the moon rose on the blue waves. Hundreds of magnificent golden thunderbolts fell on the world, as if the gods of thunder were wantonly whipping the earth. The mountains and rivers were shattered, and the earth was overturned. The demons hiding in the secret caves were found one by one. There were also dozens of black flood dragons swaying in the air, swallowing the cultivators of the wind-riding demon clan. They chewed with big mouthfuls, and the sound was like a string of firecrackers. Don't forget that sword cultivators were also Qi cultivators. In addition to the natal flying sword, they also had all kinds of strange natal items of great refinement and intermediate refinement. Chapter 857. A Taoist Dharma form, 5,000 feet tall, landed a heavy punch on the celestial hairpin city. Not only was the punch unable to penetrate immortal hairpin city, it wasn't even able to touch the city's main body. It only shattered countless golden lights. However, this punch surged with surging stellar energy, causing the weather in the two vassal cities of immortal hairpin city to become chaotic. Wind and rain abruptly erupted in one place, and there were faint signs of heavy snow in another. In the two cities, the Earth Immortal Realm cultivators of the demon race were shaken and trembling. The Qi cultivators who had yet to form their golden cores were in a better situation. They hurriedly took out their natal items to help stabilize their Taoist heart and resist the overwhelming power of the heavenly tribulation. Those who were cultivating felt as if their minds were hit by a heavy hammer. They felt suffocated and vomited a mouthful of blood. Many cultivators of the lower 5 states even fainted on the spot. Is it really the hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi? Once they heard that the hidden official might be a guest in Immortal Hairpin City, many female officials of Immortal Hairpin City flew out together like birds, leaving their branches. Each of them stood in an open field of vision, either looking up or looking down at the Dharma idol. They were in high spirits, their eyes shining. They were actually lucky enough to see a living hidden official with their own eyes. Some of the well-intentioned people who tried to dissuade them from returning to their cultivation grounds were all given the cold shoulder. Chapter 858. This chapter is not considered to be updated on the 7th. There's another chapter on the 7th. After the upper half of the celestial hairpin city was slapped away, thousands of fireflies lit up simultaneously. Those were the figures of cultivators who escaped from the celestial hairpin city. Lu Chen glanced at this ethereal scene. It was colorful and beautiful, but it was a pity that the monkeys scattered when the tree fell. From now on, there would be no taller city in the wilderness. Sand gathered to form a mountain, but water scattered in a day. The wind and rain would always blow away the wind and rain. However, today, the celestial hairpin city was destroyed by the young hidden official's pure martial prowess. Lu Chen retracted his gaze and reminded, "It's about time for us to stop. If we get too involved here, it'll hinder the sword." Chapter 859. Author's Note. Updated late, 16,000 words. P.S. There's one more chapter tonight. Jiang Shangzhen, who was wandering around the barren land, met a group of traveling cultivators by chance. Jiang Shangzhen's out-of-body spirit was helping Master Qingmi to get through the difficulties together. If meeting Feng Xuetao was an accident, then meeting this group of talented young people was even more unexpected. Jiang Shangzhen's original intention was to go to the nearest tattooed fairy to find Zheng Juzhong. However, the nearest tattooed fairy was a continent away. Chapter 860. The city next to the Jiuquan sect was crowded with people. It was even livelier than the capital of the Yunwen dynasty. Most of the people were demon cultivators of the lower five realms who had yet to complete their form refinement. Apart from those who sold wine, most of them were foreigners who came here to do business or to travel. The restaurants and taverns of various sizes were very similar to the Great Wall of Sword Qi in the early years. Once they got money, they would look for wine, sit before the cup when they were sober, and sleep under the table when they were drunk. The foundation of the sects in the wasteland could be seen at a glance. It depended on how many people they had. However, the Jiuquan sect didn't have much strength. It was far inferior to the immortal hairpin city. There were only two cultivators of the upper five realms in the sect. One was the immortal sect master who wanted to give up his position every day, and the other was the unpolished Jade Realm Patriarch who was unwilling to inherit the sect master's position even if he was beaten to death. The rest of the sect's cultivators, regardless of their gender, were all alcoholics who were proficient in brewing wine and liked to drink. Qi Tingji, who came as a guest, was used to drinking slowly. However, Lu Ji drank big bowls, and her face was red. Previously, Qi Tingji specially picked two types of fine wine from the Jiuquan sect that Alliance described as ration wine. He and Lu Ji each had a pot. It was cheap and good. Every time Alliance secretly traveled to the wasteland, he would come to the Jiuquan sect to hang out for a few days before he was willing to return. Chapter 861. This chapter was uploaded late. P.S. There will be another chapter on the 15th. Chen Pingon held the sword in his left hand. There was a huge mountain in front of him. Previously at Celestial Hairpin City, Chen Pingon's Taoist Dharma form did not display any swordsmanship. He chose to use his fists to shake the tall mountain. This was to remind the third sect master of the Baek Kyung building that they had yet to settle their old scores. Later on, Lu Chen drew a Tao understanding painting with a cicada attached to a line. How could it not be reciprocated politeness? He was hinting to Chen Pingon that if he wanted to successfully deliver the sword at the moon-bearing mountain, the immortal weapon-grade longsword Night Roaming was still not enough, and he had to change to another one. Chapter 862. On the moon's supporting mountain, except for the cultivators and all kinds of mountain monsters, all the dead things had long been refined by the great demon Primogenin. Therefore, every time the mountain-protecting formation was destroyed and reactivated, it was an invisible reversal of time for a year. This made all the hiding techniques and escape techniques of the demon clan cultivators in the mountain meaningless. After every round of sword questioning by the 5 sword cultivators of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, all the demon clan cultivators except the great demon Primogenita would appear in the original place. However, the aura of the acupuncture points and magic treasures would not follow their footsteps and return to their original state. Just like a group of pitiful passers-by, walking on the bank of the long river of time, they had to rush through wind and rain, constantly changing the crossing of time, which hurt the strength of their feet little by little. Then, they inexplicably returned to the original place again and again. They had to face greater despair and those sword lights that blotted out the sky. The previous 5 sword cultivators, every time together to question the moon-supporting mountain, it was mostly the hidden official who was responsible for cutting the mountain with his sword and taking the lead to break the mountain-protecting formation of the long river of time. The other 4 sword cultivators were responsible for killing the demons. At the same time, each of them used the abundant sword Qi and vast sword intent to wear down the spiritual aura and the fate of the mountains and rivers that had accumulated in the moon's supporting mountain for thousands of years and finally changed the situation. Chen Pingon alone handed out a total of 3,000 swords. The Wildlands Patriarch's first disciple, the great demon Primal Omen, was cut in half by the sword light from between his eyebrows. Chapter 863. As one of the Confucian temple's accompanying sages, the old teacher, He Shou, was in charge of guarding the Great Wall of Sword Aura. He immediately descended from the sky and hovered in the air outside half of the Great Wall of Sword Aura. The old teacher abided by the rules and did not step on the city wall. He bowed to the most experienced swordsman in the world and said respectfully, "Junior, he pays his respects to Sword Deity Boss." Alliance was the one who gave the nickname Sword Deity Boss. Later on, the native swordsmen of the Great Wall of Sword Aura followed suit. The returning swordsmen from other continents were also used to addressing Chen Qingdao as such. It seemed to have become an unspoken rule. Chen Qingdao only looked at the moon-supporting mountain and ignored the greetings of the Confucian temple sages. He Shou, who was ignored, did not mind. If Sword Deity Boss was easy to talk to, he would not be Chen Qingdao. He Shou then smiled bitterly. He had been kept in the dark about the high-level god's concealment, appearance, and attack. As a result, he had implicated half of the city wall where the young secluded official was at Dao unification. Before the eldest sword immortal appeared, Chen Pingan's Dao unification spot had been concealed by an offensive divine ability. Chapter 864. On and off the mountain, two people faced each other, each displaying their abilities. One came to pay a visit, while the other returned a greeting. On Chen Pingan's side, the blue-clothed Taoist who had walked out of the wooden residence appeared behind moon-bearing mountain. He stood at the peak of the five-colored mountain like a god, holding up the heavens. In his hand was a water-word seal that contained 40% of the water fate of the Yeluo, and at his waist hung the rain prayer art. Behind the Taoist Dharma form that was 10,000 feet tall, there was a golden body Dharma form that looked like a deity. Its arms were coiled with fire dragons, and its feet were stepping on a white jade capital. It was the manifestation of the Jade Talisman Palace's most precious treasure in the past. A sword immortal banner was erected in the divine firmament city, and a 5-thunder Dharma seal was raised up high by the deity, and it hung at the highest point of the caged sparrow's small world. After Chen Pingan opened the eyes of the 36 deities from various sects, together with the 18 sword immortal heroic spirits in white robes, they wandered around the mountain river realm, wantonly slaughtering the demon cultivators around the moon-bearing mountain. After the 36 gods flew out from the Dharma seal, a large group of mural-like figures followed behind them, floating like fairies. These goddesses had long eyebrows, thin eyes, and plump faces. Chapter 865. It was like a brand new martyr's palace had been created in the Yeluo. Water madly poured into it, and when the boundless sword Qi stirred it up, the clouds began to evaporate. The water levels of the nearby Yeluo tributaries instantly plummeted, and the riverbeds were once more exposed. This was the second time this had happened. Countless aquatic monsters fled to the shore, frantically migrating away from that massive hole filled with sword Qi. Countless blue sword Qi overflowed, spreading out in all directions. In the vast waters of the Yeluo's main channel and its tensome tributaries, countless aquatic creatures had died to the earthquake and flood of sword Qi, their corpses strewn across the land. The power of this sword had caused the heavens to cave in. Chen Qingdao stood at the edge of the hole and frowned. What's going on? Logically speaking, Bai Zai shouldn't have been so weak. Chapter 866. On Luopa Mountain. The weather was refreshing. In the courtyard of a residence, there was almost no place to stand. Large bamboo sieves and large wicker dustpans were all sun-dried, with bright red chilies. In the corridor under the eaves, Zhu Lian was lying on a recliner, resting with his eyes closed and gently fanning himself. After Qin Yuanji finished walking the mountain path, she came here to sit for a while. She liked to chat with old Master Zhu, not only because Zhu Lian brought her up the mountain and led her on the path of martial arts, but also because Qin Yuanji treated old Master Zhu as her only family member. Chapter 867. There is a small chapter in the evening. As the sword was thrust out, many of the inner demon's illusions that were lying across the road dissipated. The culprit at the peak of the Ascendant Realm who was in charge of guarding the moon-bearing mountain was not only a pure sword cultivator, but his natal flying sword was even engraved with a part of the supernatural powers of the two high-level deities, the Venomous One and the Echoing One. The city god Shen Wen's golden script gall shattered. His face was full of regret, as if he regretted handing over the script gall back then. The white-robed monk turned sideways and leaned back slightly. He twirled the string of Buddhist beads in his hand and looked at the young hidden official from the corner of his eyes. He smiled playfully as if he was saying that they would meet again someday. Chapter 868. A small chapter one haven't seen in a long time. In the 3rd month of the wilderness, the Jade Hook has already fallen into the human world. The previous owner of Toad Palace had already left for Howren, and this bright moon had become a land without a master. And on the bright moon that had once hung in the sky, there was a lifeless ruin of an ancient, immortal palace. It seemed to have once experienced a great battle. The several hundred buildings that once stretched across the vast expanse of land seemed to have been razed to the ground, leaving only the foundation. Even when Qi Tingji and several other sword cultivators tried to delay the moon, there was still no change in the ruins. It was only when Bai Zhe appeared in the Yeluo that there was a massive disturbance. Chapter 869. Back when Chun Pingon borrowed a few books from Kintianjian, he did not return to the Cloud Echo Tower or the inn. Instead, he went directly to the top of the outer city wall of the capital city and saw a ferry hanging over the border of the capital region. There, he saw 2 unusually strong dragon Qi on it. They were the true dragon GQ and the vassal King Songmu. It was like 2 large lanterns swaying in the courtyard next to the mud bottle lane in the middle of the night. It was difficult to miss them. Chun Pingon took another step and directly boarded the heavily guarded ferry. At the same time, he took out the 3rd-class consecrated medallion and raised a high. A general clad in armor and holding a saber, together with a few cultivators who accompanied the ferryboat, had already formed a crescent-shaped encirclement. Clearly, their priority was to expel the visitors. It was only when they saw the medallion issued by the Ministry of Justice that they did not strike immediately. The general asked in a deep voice, "Who are you?" The cultivator in front of him was dressed in a long green robe and looked calm. Chapter 870. Zhengyang Mountain, Cloud Passing Tower. The sky was clear after the rain, and the atmosphere was fresh. At Egret Crossing outside the mountain, the reeds had bloomed, and the rice on the other side of the terraced fields was golden. The mountains further away, at Zhengyang Mountain, seemed to be busier. They were busy with construction and sewing. There was no guest in the familiar A-room. Chun Pingon went inside the room and moved a rattan chair to the observation deck. Looking at the cyan mist peak, which was the closest to him, he gently shook the blade's strengthening gourd in his hand. Chapter 871. 17,000 words chapter. The next chapter will be updated later, will be uploaded in the wee hours of the morning. When Chun Pingon was young, he once sighed, the Aquarius continent was truly too big, but it was still the smallest continent in the vast world. But to a 14th realm cultivator, the land of a continent was as small as his own courtyard. A person who had attained the Tao could travel with the wind, overlooking the world from a bird's eye view. All kinds of strange things could be seen. He once saw a monk, sitting cross-legged under a waterfall, his palms clasped together under the sunlight. He looked like a golden arhat. Chapter 872. Within the borders of the kingdom of Mengliang. The Sea of Clouds on Mount Yunxia was an extremely famous celestial scenery in the Aquarius continent. Especially when the Sea of Clouds was illuminated by the sun, it wasn't the usual golden color. Instead, it was filled with spiritual energy and colorful brilliance. It was hailed as the heavenly beauty by Qi cultivators. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to become one of the best-selling books in the vast 9 continents, the Compendium of Mountains and Seas. Moreover, the ever-changing clouds and mist would sometimes contain a bit of true spirit and transform into the ancestral masters of each generation. As long as the disciples of Mount Yunxia were fated, they would be able to converse with them and consult the ancestral masters about their sex Tao techniques. Chun Pingon stood on top of the Sea of Clouds and looked at the distant capital of the kingdom of Mengliang. He had a panoramic view of the circulation of the country's fate. There was once a small wine shop on Mount Upside Down. It was a broken, blessed land of golden millet. It implied that after drinking good wine, one could obtain a golden millet dream. However, he didn't know if it was related to the kingdom of Mengliang. Chapter 873. Chun Pingon stood on the spider silk that connected the two moons and took a step back. His body fell straight down and chased after the ancient demon that had voluntarily retreated from the battlefield. At the same time, he stretched out his hand and pulled, keeping the spider silk that its owner could not keep away in time into his sleeve. Anyway, with Lu Chen around, there would be no future trouble. Chun Pingon glanced at the door. Separated by a door was the green underworld. Over there, the aura of Tao was abundant, and there seemed to be a large group of mountaintop Taoist priests gathering one after another. Bai Zhe and the Sage of Rites, who had once fought side by side and were extremely congenial for 10,000 years, did not show any mercy when they fought each other 10,000 years later. For the sake of the bright moon that was about to move out of the wasteland, one stopped the four-sword cultivators from joining forces to drag the moon, while the other stopped Bai Zhe from stopping them. Both sides fought until the time was in chaos. Both sides were already great cultivators of the 14th level 10,000 years ago. Because of the great Tao in their hearts, they chose to give up on ascending to the 15th level. Chapter 874. Chun Pingon arrived at the northern boundary of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Other than a new path opened by the Confucian Temple, the rest of the land was razed to the ground. Looking around, there was nothing. Lu Chen revealed himself and walked side by side with Chun Pingon in the ruins that did not have any scenery to speak of. A city filled with sword cultivators and wine shops, as well as the scattered sword immortal residences outside the city, no longer existed. In the Elm Immortal Inn, there was once a female sword immortal who loved to plant flowers. She asked the Lingji Zhai of the Hanging Mountain to buy an ancient elm tree from the Fuyao continent and transplanted it to her courtyard. Perhaps it was not acclimatized to the environment and could not withstand the ubiquitous sword aura. It withered for many years. Unexpectedly, a flower bloomed one day and bloomed on the roof, beautiful beyond compare. However, when the sword immortal Ku Xia of the Central Plains returned to the Great Wall of Sword Qi, the woman and the flower were never seen again. Chapter 875. There's still a 10,000-word chapter before 1 in the morning. Lu Chen rolled up his sleeves and created a worldly restriction with a wave of his hand, helping Chun Pingon conceal the gloomy sight of a drop in cultivation level. He reminded Chun Pingon telepathically, since you already have a plan, there's no need for you to care about something that's so far away. It's better to deal with the matters at hand and return to the city immediately. Half of the Great Wall of Sword Qi was where the Tao integration took place. It could help Chun Pingon stabilize his Tao heart and realm. The mountains and rivers in the small world of the human body and the Tao heart were like a small boat that drifted unsteadily amidst the raging waves. Then, the half of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, where the Tao integration took place, would be the best ballast in the world. Chun Pingon nodded and said hoarsely, "Wait for a moment." Chapter 876. The second chapter was updated a little late, 14,000 words. Yes, of course. The little girl hurriedly put down the golden pole and green bamboo cane. She reached out and grabbed the rope of the small cotton bag and ran all the way to the table. She was so tall. If she had known, she would have run less. Xiaomi raised her head and asked if the guest is just passing by and is thirsty and in a hurry. There is water on the table. If you are willing to rest for a while and look at the scenery, you can drink tea. I will go and boil a pot of hot water for the guest. Her small face seemed to be looking forward to the guest saying that he was not in a hurry. Chapter 877. The old scholar quickly put the melon seeds into his sleeve and walked towards the two of them. However, he did not say anything to his last disciple. Instead, he looked at Ning Yao and said with a smile, "Little Ning, please be tolerant of this guy who can't stay still. If you really feel wronged one day, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, don't ever think that you're being unreasonable or whether you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Don't think about these things. Just tell me frankly. As Mr. Chen Pingon, I'll definitely help you scold him. I'll never be partial to this kid." The old man would probably only not help his own student when Ning Yao quarreled with Chen Pingon in the world. The difference between good and bad in the world could often be reversed with just 1 or 2 sentences. In a fit of anger, he would say 1 or 2 harsh and sarcastic words that he shouldn't have. On normal days, he would say 1 or 2 useless and comforting words. This was because the closer someone was to them, the easier it was for them to feel that everything they did was right and proper. They would feel that everything needed to be said without saying anything. Chapter 878. In the courtyard of the House of the Clouds, the old elementary scholar was drunk and said that he wanted to go somewhere. He had long wanted to go personally to express his gratitude. He even said that it was where his money came from and that it was the first time in his life that he had gathered a decent set of 4 treasures of the study. He was like a true scholar studying in a study. Chen Pingon knew where he was going and did not follow. The old elementary scholar left the courtyard and went out alone. Once upon a time, in a shabby alley in a small country in the Central Plains, there was a master and a disciple. Every time they were so poor that they did not have anything to eat. Since they had nothing to do, they would stand at the door together and wait for a letter from the young man. Actually, the 2 of them did not care about what was written on the letter. After all, what they were waiting for is not the letter, but the money that came along with the letter. It was the salary of the local elementary scholar. Money was the courage of a hero. Occasionally, when there were festivals, such as the birthday of the Holy Master, the master in the Aquarius continent would send a sum of money to the teacher in name, giving him a package of money that could not be determined in quantity. The first time the poor elementary scholar came into contact with banknotes, he received a very generous sum of money. Chapter 879. Chen Pingon left the night swimming sword at the Cloud Pavilion and brought Xiao Imo to buy about 2 servings of pastries and a jug of wine nearby. The total cost was exactly 14 taels of silver, not a penny more, not a penny less. After Xiao Imo and Chen Pingon finished buying the wine and pastries, they strolled leisurely in the bustling capital. He smiled and said, "Only those who can be busy with other people's affairs can be busy with other people's affairs." Fellow Taoist Lu once said that he's young master's helper. What a wonderful remark. 1 compliment, 2 compliments. Chen Pingon carried the food box and asked with a smile, "Xiao Imo, you keep calling him fellow Taoist Lu. Don't you know Lu Chen's true identity?" Xiao Imo said, "Fellow Taoist Lu's words are open and honest. He didn't hide his identity as the 3rd leader of Baek Okekyung building, but I feel that calling him Leader Lu is too polite and unworthy of fellow Taoist Lu's enthusiasm." Chapter 880. This private banquet, which is called a welcoming party, is set in a flower bed. There are clusters of flowers around, and the fragrance is refreshing. A small round table made of white jade has been brought here early. Chen Pingon and Empress Dolly sit opposite each other. There is a conspicuous wooden box on the table. Nanzan comes from Yuzhong County, so she can tell that it is a food box made of wood from her hometown. A pot of wine, 2 pairs of bamboo chopsticks, and some cheap pastries serve as dishes to accompany the wine. Seeing this, Nanzan frowned. What? Did a bumpkin from a shabby alley in a small town like him like to be mystifying after becoming a mountain man? Chapter 881. Taihui Sword Sect, Pian Ran Peak. Among the cultivators here, only Bai Shou was left. Since Bai Shou was already a sword cultivator in the Golden Core realm and Lu Jinglong was the sect master, he moved to the ancestral mountain. Therefore, Taihui's sword sect held a simple opening ceremony and Pian Ran Peak became Bai Shou's cultivation place. As long as Bai Shou was willing, he could start taking in disciples. However, Bai Shou had been listless recently. Every time he had time to practice his sword, he would sit on the bamboo chair and stare blankly. Chapter 882. A smiling old scholar came from the fire god temple and stood at the bottom of the steps of the flower shed. He said that he wanted Aunt Feng to help him inquire about the news in the palace, so as to prevent his honest, kind, and ignorant disciple from being bullied by some people who took advantage of their seniority just because they were a few years older than him. If the old man was lucky enough to get away with it, it would be a good thing. As a teacher, he definitely couldn't stand by and watch. The old scholar didn't even look at the old coachman. He only cared about getting close to Aunt Feng. When they met, he bowed with his hands clasped in front of his chest. After that, he didn't go to sit at the stone table next to the old coachman. Instead, he said something that seemed to have just been picked up from a jar of pickled vegetables. He said that if there were flowers and moon, there would be beautiful poems. Aunt Feng couldn't stand the sour smell and had no choice but to throw a jar of 100 flowers wine to the old scholar as a stopper. Sitting at the bottom of the flower shed, the old scholar seemed to notice the old coachman. He quickly straightened his back, raised his buttocks, and took the jar of 100 flowers wine to the stone table. He muttered a few words on behalf of the old scholar. How come there was only half a jar of wine left? He had heard of the old scholar's name for a long time, and it was rare for him to meet him, so he had to drink until he was drunk. Aunt Feng couldn't resist the old scholar's indirect attacks and threw another jar of wine to the old coachman. However, the old scholar just stared at the old coachman and the wine on the table, his gaze drifting up and down. The old scholar immediately understood and silently pushed the jar of 100 flowers wine he had just received to the famous scholar. Just like that, the old scholar sat by the table and took out a handful of stir-fried soybeans from his sleeve and shook them onto the table. Using one of Aunt Feng's natal divine abilities and the cool breeze between heaven and earth, he listened to the conversation in the imperial palace. There were many sages and monks in the Confucian temple, but only this old scholar could do such a shady thing and still be so confident. Chapter 883. A southbound ferry that belonged to the Eternal Spring Palace would stop at the Ox Horn Ferry in the Dragon Province. Chao Qingling arrived outside Pei Qian's room and stood in the corridor. She knocked on the door gently and said, "It's me." Pei Qian opened the door and continued his 6-step stance walk. He asked casually, "What's the matter?" During this trip between Luapa Mountain and the capital, Pei Qian had disguised himself as a young girl so that he would not have to pay for medicine for nothing. The 6-step stance walk was the only boxing technique that Chen Pingon did not try to hide when Pei Qian was young. Chapter 884. Chen Pingon and Xiao Imo stood at the railing of the ferry. Under their eyelids, the earth, mountains, and rivers meandered like silk. Looking up, if there were no walls in the sky, then human vision was like an invisible wall, and everyone was trapped in it. Xiao Imo asked, "Are you waiting for someone?" "I'm waiting for the owner of this ferry." Chen Pingon turned his head to look at the 3rd floor of the ferry, then withdrew his gaze and continued to walk with Xiao Imo at the bow of the boat. In fact, the ferry under their feet, called Li Quan, was an immortal magic treasure that could move clouds and summon rain. Since the founding of the Song clan, until more than 100 years ago, the Song clan had not yet gotten rid of the vassal status of the Liu dynasty. They were troubled internally and externally, and their national power was weak. They often needed to borrow this mountain ferry from the Changchun Palace to solve the drought in the local counties and invite immortal masters to cast spells and rain. It was said that the Dali imperial court owed a lot of debts because of this, and the Changchun Palace never pressed the Song clan for debts. Therefore, when the Dali dynasty rose, the Song emperors had always treated the cultivators of the Changchun Palace especially well. If not for the fact that the Changchun Palace did not have a cultivator in the pure Jade realm, it would have undoubtedly become a sect. Presumably, the Emperor of Dali would have made an exception and attended the celebration personally. Chapter 885. Chun Pingon and Xiao Emo walked onto an arched bridge and stopped. A breeze blew over the Changpu River, causing the water scales to shimmer with golden light. Xiao Emo asked, "Is there something on your mind, young master?" Chun Pingon placed his hand on the railing. "I'm estimating how much money I can earn in a year if I open a restaurant here." Xiao Emo laughed involuntarily. Chapter 886. Xiao Emo brought the lieutenant to the fortune-telling stall. In the lieutenant's eyes, the stall was a bit shabby. There was only a table and a pot of lots. There wasn't even a banner with something like Iron Mouth Divine Prediction written on it. Although Xiao Emo was an immortal master, he wasn't experienced enough in Jianghu. Forget it, since he was now Qiao Mo's follower, he would teach him a trick for free. However, the lieutenant was confused and couldn't help but ask, "Xiao Emo, why didn't Xiao Emo accept the immortal money in the end? If I'm not wrong, isn't that the legendary snow money used by the immortals in the mountains?" Were all the immortals in the mountains so indifferent to money? Xiao Emo said, "It's hard to part with good money. Those who can part with good money are experts." Even if the lieutenant had heard of these useless principles from books, if he took them out and compiled them into a book, it would fill several baskets. However, wouldn't the money in his pocket be cleaner than his face? Chapter 887. Emperor Song. He went straight to the point, but he saw that Chun Pingon did not seem to have any intention of speaking. After a while, Song he clearly did not have any intention of returning home. He glanced at the dishes on the table and shifted the chair beside him slightly, tilting it towards Chun Pingon. He asked, "Mr. Chun, shall we sit down and talk?" Chun Pingon nodded. He shifted his chair, pulled his jacket, sat down, and crossed his legs. A pair of black and white cloth shoes with a white sole was revealed. "Song," he said, "Mr. Chun, please think about it. I can wait." Chun Pingon smiled and asked, "Is this the Empress Dowager's idea?" Chapter 888. Chunshan Academy. The old scholar had traveled across continents and returned to the Confucian Temple. If he did not return, the people from the Confucian Temple would block his door and scold him. Before leaving, the old scholar chatted with the young Taoist for a while. Immortal Wei felt sad. Was this immortal Master Chao's teacher? The old man looked kind, but the problem was that he was as poor as him. Chapter 889. Chun Pingon and Ning Yao walked back to the small town. This was no longer the Huaihuang County, where there was only the inspection office. The two of them passed by an old and time-honored restaurant. It didn't occupy a large area, but it had 3 floors. This was once the tallest building in the small town, but the 3rd floor was not open to the public. Chun Pingon suddenly had an idea and said that they were going inside to drink. He even smiled and told Ning Yao that in the early years, only the rich people of Falu Street and Peachleaf Alley would come here to drink. Otherwise, the old master of the dragon kiln would take in disciples and hold a banquet here. After chatting with a fire god temple in the capital, Chun Pingon learned that this restaurant was actually Aunt Feng's property. The 3rd floor was one of her resting places. In addition, Aunt Feng had accumulated quite a few land deeds. She even revealed a heavenly secret, saying that most of the dragon kills that had been converted to civilian kills were under the old coachman's name. The old coachman usually lived in Erlang Alley. As for Lu Wei of the school of Yinyang, he had quite a few residences in Falu Street and Peachleaf Alley. Chun Pingon chose a table by the window and ordered a pot of wine. The wine pot and wine bowl were all made of locally made celadone. Chapter 890. Oxhorn Ferry. Green mountains rose from the ground and green water flowed east. Wild geese swam in autumn. A huge ferry slowly approached the shore. It gave off a startling aura. Huge ripples of spiritual chi kicked up gusts of mountain wind. Compared to regular ferries of immortals, it seemed abnormally large, like a serpent swimming in shallow water. It was the wind kite ferry that had not cost Luapa Mountain a single cent to repair. Only Zhong Qiu and Cui Wei returned to the Dragon Province with a ferry, completing the wind kite ferry's first interplanar journey. Chun Pingon clasped his fist with a smile. Thank you for your hard work. Chapter 891. Chun Pingon purposely chose the beginning of winter as the ferry docked at the lower sect. Cui Dongshan built a few temporary huts at the entrance of the mountain and moved out a few tables. There were quite a number of people in both the upper and lower sections. Cui Dongshan was like a shopkeeper and a waiter, busying himself in the kitchen with Shiqiu. During the beginning of winter, there was a bowl of dumplings and a bowl of mending winter soup, also known as root soup. It was made from various herbs and roots, and it was for auspicious purposes. It was not a celestial item. On each table, there was also a plate of sauce and vinegar and a large plate of pickled vegetables. As for wine, sorry, if you want a drink, you have to make it yourself. Our lower sect is so poor now. There were 5 people sitting at the main table. The leader of the upper sect, Luapa Mountain, Chun Pingon. The leader of Luapa Mountain, whose Taoist name was Ling Chun, was Changming. Chapter 892. The night passed peacefully. With Xiao and Mo keeping watch at night, it was difficult for anything to happen. For example, when Chun Pingon and Xiao Mo went to Qingyuan Prefecture together and worked as escorts for a few days, the disciples of the martial arts club were worried that they would break the rules and drink alcohol and be robbed of their goods by strong people. But in fact, at that time, in addition to a sword practitioner in the Ascended State and a martial artist in the Ultimate State, there was also Yuan Ling Hall of the Xian Peak, whose unadorned jade-killing power was recognized as comparable to that of immortals. Not to mention in Qingyuan Prefecture, a small country, even in any other world, if someone bumped into such an escort, it was not called robbery. According to a certain saying in the Summer Palace, it was called sending one's head from 1,000 miles away. Chun Pingon closed his eyes and concentrated his qi. He concentrated his mind into a mustard seed and cleaned up the broken mountains and rivers in his small world. Pei Qian stood on the edge of the cliff and used the mountain-quaking fist to maintain his stance. He seemed to be sleeping, but he was not, nourishing his fist intent. Chapter 893. The winter sun shone brightly in the capital of the Liang Kingdom. A brand new Taoist temple built by the emperor would definitely be mistaken for a 1,000-year-old Taoist temple if a tourist were to enter. It was an antique temple built with nearly 1,000,000 taels of gold and silver from the national treasury. The sun shone on the green glazed roof of a palace. There was a row of lifelike vertebrae on the roof. Among them, the lion-like statue of the Bai and seemed to shake its head. The distance between them was like night and day. It was daytime on the roof, but it was night under the eaves. In the darkness, a woman walked slowly in the corridor with a palace lantern in her hand. Her slender hands were as white as the moonlight. She walked back and forth in the corridor with the lantern. She would pass by 2 red doors every time. Separated by 1 door was a completely different world. Chapter 894. Pei Qian had a great harvest this time. Among the bundles of cheaply sold books, Pei Qian found a secret archive of the palace examination. It was the only copy of the imperial examination, which collected the essays of nearly 100 imperial examination scholars. Every imperial examination paper had bright red words written by the emperors of the past dynasties. Other than the essays, there was also the title and name of the official reading the paper at the end. Although the imperial qi was weak and had dissipated a lot, the literary qi was very strong. It was a real treasure. Chun Pingon flipped through the oldest and most recent imperial examinations papers and remembered a series of official titles and names. At that time, beside the shop, a thin old man in a Confucian robe was stunned. He was probably shocked by Chun Pingon's luck. After hesitating for a long time, he asked Chun Pingon if he could sell these papers to him. Chun Pingon shook his head and smiled. "Sir, I can't accept your request. The old man smiled and said, "A gentleman doesn't take what others like. I'm being rude." Chapter 895. 27,000 words long chapter. Updated a bit late. The mountain light suddenly fell, and the moon gradually rose. The human world lit up, a heavenly lamp. A river meandered into the sea. The water vapor was thick. There were 16 docks of various sizes along the river for the ferry boats to dock. The trade was prosperous. Around each dock, there were small towns built near the water. They were as big as Huaihuang County. When night fell, the lights were as bright as day. There were many martial arts halls on both sides of the river. Even in the eyes of a beginner geomaster, they could see that the martial arts scene here was great. It was the best in the continent. Wu Guang had already traveled to other continents for more than 20 years. Now he was going to the wilderness again. In addition, this martial saint was not very interested in taking in disciples. So far, he had only taken in one disciple. Therefore, Yi Yunyun was the only martial artist left in the Tongyi continent. This gave Mount Pu a great reputation. Chapter 896. Sorry, I uploaded the chapter 2 hours late. It's a 28,000-word chapter. There was a torrential downpour. At noon, the sky was dark and gloomy. The road was muddy and mud splashed everywhere. There was a rope bridge across the river. Under the bridge, the waves were surging. The wooden planks of the ancient bridge swayed violently with the wind and rain, almost flipping over. There was a group of people holding umbrellas walking by the river. There was a green-robed swordsman. Beside him was a yellow-clothed woman. Behind them was a young man and woman. The man was handsome and the woman had her hair tied up in a bun. Chapter 897. Cui Dongshan was the first to walk out of the forbidden land of thunder created by the golden sword Qi. Xiao Emo said, "There are no mistakes." Cui Dongshan nodded and smiled. "Mr. needs to practice in seclusion for a while. Let's just wait." The young man in white held the back of his head with his hands. Xiao Emo, wearing a yellow hat and green shoes, held the green bamboo cane in his arms. Cui Dongshan said telepathically, "Other than the most important thing, Mr. will also refine the moon in the well to see if he can concretize a maze of heaven and earth. It could be the celestial capital mountain outside, the summer palace that no longer exists, or the Liju cave before the fall of our hometown. The more Mr. understands the maze, the closer he will be to the truth. Therefore, if he succeeds, Mr. will let the natal flying sword master the second supernatural power of evolution. With the help of the caged sparrow that can create a small world of its own, there will be no mistakes." Chapter 898. Before I met the hidden official, I was still curious about what kind of extraordinary man he must be to be worthy of Sword Celestial Ning, the most powerful person in the world. Even in front of my brother Zhong, I expressed my doubts more than once. Until today, when I met him, I finally understood what it meant to be a match made in heaven. Yu Lao pulled the strings, and they were a perfect couple. Only after meeting Sword Immortal Ning did I realize that all the women in the world are mediocre. When I met the hidden official with my own eyes, I realized what it means to be young and promising. I've wasted my time. I've lived so long, yet I've lived like a dog. Oh right, Mountain Lord Chun. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Su Gu, and my Taoist name is Gusu, and I'm the aunt of a woman. Brother Zhong and I have the same temperament, and we hit it off at first sight. To be honest, the reason why I can become sworn brothers with Zhong Kuei and travel the Yi continent together is all thanks to the Sword Celestial Ning. Zhong Kuei looked at the fatty, who looked sincere, and spoke sincerely. He was quite pitiful. Gu Su had indeed questioned Chen Pingon many times. For example, this brat must be a big pig trotter with a bad stomach and could not eat coarse grains. He had only read a few sage books and did not pick up the good ones but the bad ones. He was not a gentleman at all, and was good at sweet talking. Ningyao's aptitude was too good, and she definitely did not know the dangers of the mortal world. Moreover, she had grown up in the Great Wall of Sword Qi, and was most likely a little girl who did not know the ways of the world. Then, a scholar from outside the Great Wall of Sword Qi stole the corner of the entire Great Wall of Sword Qi and was bewitched by Chun Pingan's sweet-talking. Since when had there been a lack of such incidents in the traveling immortals? Chapter 899. They got off the boat at a celestial ferry called the Ink Line Ferry. The ferry was crowded with buildings, but most of them were newly built after the war. It was like a small town with a small river passing through the town. The river was quiet and calm. Shops stood on both sides of the river, but the business was poor. The ferry got its name because there was a kind of strange aquatic creature there in the early years. They looked like fish and snakes, but they were not snakes. They were very difficult to catch and died as soon as they came out of the water. They were slender, and their backs were like an ink line. They swam in the water in groups, and the ink lines were like mountain ranges. However, after the war, there was no sign of this kind of aquatic creature in the river, so the Ink Line Ferry did not live up to its name. Huang Yun brought her disciple Xue Huai and 2 guests from Mount Pu to attend the opening ceremony of the celestial capital mountain. The old woman and the young girl beside Yi Yunyun were the owners of the tea shed with the engagement shop by the Jilin River. The old woman was called Qiubu, and her real body was an old dragon. She was almost 5,000 years old and used to be a nanny of the old Great Blasphemy Dragon Palace. She was one of the ministers of the emperor. She had a low position and power, and her real power was equivalent to half of the patriarch of the celestial family on the mountain. The young girl was called Hu Chuling. Her parents' surname was Hu Chuling, and her nickname was Vinegar. Chapter 900. In the ruins of the Great Desecration Dragon Palace in Tongya Continent, there was a white-clothed woman in the hall and a green-clothed man outside. The 2 neighbors reunited in a foreign land, but there was no harmonious atmosphere of meeting an old friend in a foreign land. In the Luapa Mountain of the Aquarius Continent, on the main peak of the Spirit Gathering Peak, on the first floor of the bamboo building, there was a long sword in its scabbard. Suddenly, the sword flashed, and the unsheathed long sword left Luapa Mountain in a flash. The sword aura was like a rainbow as it suddenly swept out of Dali's northern peak. Wei Pai did not even have time to help cover the sword aura. Fortunately, the long sword pierced through the air very quickly. Human cultivators would at most catch a glimpse of it, and it would disappear without a trace. Chapter 901. Celestial Capital Mountains Banished Immortal Peak, Flower-Sweeping Terrace. Pei Qian and Xue Huai, who were about to use the Q-ask fist, were separated by 10 feet. Beside Chun Pingan, Cui Dongshan had his hands on the back of his head, ready to applaud and cheer for Grand Senior Sister at any time. Xiao Imo did not come as he was busy at the Treasure Drop Beach. He had to build a thatched cottage beside the Qingyi River. Xiao Imo was not particularly interested in the Qi-asking fist. He only said that since they were guests, young master and Miss Pei should be gentle with their punches, so as not to hurt the harmony. In any case, it was just flattery. You can even do this. Chapter 902. After Yi Yunyun left, Sui Yu didn't say a word. She immediately rode her sword down the mountain and went to the treasure landing beach by the Qingyi River. Qiu Ju brought Hu Chuling along to tour the banished Immortal Peak. The 2 matches between Luapa Mountain and Pu Mountain had broadened the old woman's horizons. Most importantly, the winner wasn't complacent, while the loser wasn't discouraged. This made the old woman feel that it was especially valuable. After the perilous encounter at the Great Desecration Dragon Palace and witnessing Chun Pingan's performance, the old woman had a very good impression of the immortal capital mountain. Chapter 903. The moon was bright, and the stars were dim. Sha Qing's ears moved slightly. He turned his head and looked into the distance. He said, "Master, Xiao who is here?" Li Yeho nodded and reminded them telepathically, "Remember to pay attention to your words. No matter what Mr. Cui says to me, just listen to him. Don't mind him." Maid Huang Wan, who was adjusting the strings of the zither, followed Huang Wan's line of sight and looked into the distance. She could vaguely see a snow-white figure in the distance. It seemed to be riding the wind while sticking close to the ground. Suddenly, the figure lifted up again and again. Huang Wan's line of sight continued to rise. The bright moon hung in the sky, and the mustard seed's back was facing the full moon. That person sped up and rode the wind, suddenly crashing straight towards the mountain peak. He was like a person under the bright moon, banished to the mortal world. Chapter 904. Little Dragon Qiu's ancestral mountain was shaped like a rui scepter. Under the ancient pine, Sita Mengjing seemed to be sure that Chen Pingon would come here. She closed her eyes to rest and waited patiently for the young hidden official's guest, Little Dragon Qiu. Huang Ting was a bit bored, so he called Linghu Jinyu to chat with him. However, the girl didn't dare to be rash in the presence of the dragon-beard immortal. No matter what Huang Ting asked, she just nodded or shook her head. She didn't dare to disturb the Grand Master of the upper sect. As a cultivator who came down from the mountain, she was familiar with all kinds of strange stories about the great dragon Qiu of the upper sect. There were endless stories about the dragon-beard immortal. He was a good friend of Zhou Xinji, one of the top 10 in the central region. He attended the banquet of the Green Immortal Mountain in the Bamboo Sea Cave. The flower goddess of the blessed land of 100 flowers was his confidant. He traveled in the inverted hanging mountain and had a good talk with Gao Zhen, who had a dragon-beard horsetail whisk and whose grandmaster was the invincible Baek Okekyung building. He stayed in the Water Fairy Palace, one of the 4 private residences in the inverted hanging mountain. It was said that he was very close to the Cloud Sign Fairy of the Rain Dragon sect. He was also a good friend of the Ascendant State cultivator who called himself the Master of the 37th Peak. At the beginning of cultivation, the old immortal called him Dragon-Beard Immortal because of the huge gap between their realms. Chapter 905. At the end of the year, there was another heavy snowfall and countless broken jade. A military ferry of the Great Quan dynasty had already sailed far away from the northern border. In a few hours, it would arrive at the celestial capital Mountain Ferry. An old man wearing an old and heavy fox fur coat was traveling north. Occasionally, he would leave his house and walk to the railing to look at the winding mountains and rivers in the snow. To see the signs of a bumper harvest, the celestial algae floated in the air. It was no longer the bleak scene of the barren fields at the foot of the mountain, countless dried bones, apes climbing withered vines, and cranes looking at broken tablets. Chapter 906. Before going up the mountain, Yao Xianji wanted to put the fox fur coat on his grandfather, but Chen Pingon shook his head with a smile, hinting that it was unnecessary. Afterwards, Yao Xianji discovered that in this season of melting snow, the snow was white and covered in silver. The mountain was frozen and there were no clouds, but the mountain breeze was warm and gentle, making people not feel the slightest bit cold. Moreover, the snow on the mountain path below their feet had already melted by itself, as if there was an invisible mountain god opening a path for the 3 of them. The old man was in high spirits. He smiled and said, "Let's go up the mountain." He had spent his whole life in the army at the border of Daquan. Other than the few times he went to the capital to meet the emperor, he did not move much. He did not travel or explore the world. The number of famous mountains and rivers that the old man had set foot on could be counted with one's fingers. Thinking back to the days when he was a young scout at the border, he chased the enemy with a bow and sword covered in snow. Every time the river froze, the sound of broken jade could be heard when the horses stepped on it. Chapter 907. Yu Dynasty, Luo Jing. Dai Yuan, a practitioner of the Gold Core realm from the Green Seal sect, had just returned from the imperial palace. On his way back, his carriage passed by the magnificent temple of Jadeite. This Gold Core realm executive of the Yu Dynasty did not expect to have anything to do with the national master, who was an outstanding beauty. Since his cultivation was not high enough, if he really wanted to knock on the door and pay a visit, he would not be turned away. But what was the point of drinking tea and looking at it? Moreover, Lu Bilong's cultivation was very high and his background was unknown. Dai Yuan didn't dare to look at him. Dai Yuan put down the curtains and sighed. For some reason, he missed little Dragon Qiu's water deity. However, Dai Yuan didn't notice that a young man in white holding a green bamboo cane was lying on the roof of the carriage with his legs crossed. He seemed to be protecting Dai Yuan. The consecrators of the Yu Dynasty were divided into internal and external affairs. They were roughly equivalent to the registered and unregistered consecrators of the immortal sections. Chapter 908. Treasure Vase Continent's Southeast Coastal Region. A young man and woman strolled past a county town's biting shop, and then went to the wine shop next door and picked a table against the wall. The man ordered a caddy of wine and a few side dishes, while the woman ordered a plate of salted preserved plums. The man raised his head and looked at the poem written on the wall. The woman glanced at it, picked up a plum, and chewed on it. It was really sour. The man took out a book from his book box and placed it on the table. While drinking, he flipped through a book on physiognomy. He liked to read books and usually even read wind horn, bird John Goose Sioux techniques. He had dabbled in them. To put it nicely, it was never a burden to have more skills. When out in the world, one more skill meant one more bowl of rice. The woman's eyebrows were like a winding mountain. When she had something on her mind, a pair of limpid eyes seemed to have clouds and mist surrounding the mountain. You're tuning into the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.